kids, welcome back to Kids Church Online. I hope all of you had a fantastic week. We're going to continue in our series today on trust and continue learning from Abram's story in the Bible on how important it is to trust God. Last week, we learned that we can trust God even when we don't understand. This week, we're going to talk about impossible things. Have you ever done something that you thought was impossible or that you thought would never happen in your lifetime? Well, I can think of a few different times in my life that I thought something that I thought was impossible actually happened. I'm going to share two things with you. So a few years ago, I took Dante to a Blue Jays game for his birthday, and we got to the Rogers Center really early so we could watch some of the warm-ups and maybe get Dante a ball from one of the players. Well, secretly, I have also always wanted a baseball, and I've never caught one, I've never gotten one. So Dante actually got his ball at the game, and then it just happened that a player threw me a ball, and later that day, just before the game started, I was actually able to get some of the Blue Jays to sign my ball. So something that I thought would never happen actually happened that day. And another time that I experienced the impossible was just last year when I was getting ready to go to Honduras. I had to make some big decisions, and I had to raise a lot of money to pay for my trip to go to Honduras. Almost $15,000 I had to raise in order to cover all my costs and expenses, and I thought that is an impossible number. I'm never going to get there, but I did raise that money, and I was able to go to Honduras because God promised me that I was going to go on that trip, and he called me to go. So I had to remember that even though I thought it was impossible, God could still do it. It was exciting, and it's awesome when God does those things that are impossible in our lives. So we're going to head to our video now, and we're going to hear more of Abram's story.
Hey, I'm Corey.
And I'm Laura, and today we're going to continue our series on trust.
Yes, and today's big idea is we can trust God even when it seems impossible.
Well, then I've got to ask you, Corey, what are some things you really want to do, but you feel like they might be impossible?
Well, I really want to win the Amazing Race. I've always wanted to pet a lion, and I want to finish an Ironman one day.
See, I don't think those things are impossible. They're all within reach. I thought the Ironman one was impossible, but I just signed up for my first one next year, so I think it's possible.
Well, then I guess I'm going to have to sign up too.
You guys are going to love this. Today we're talking about love, what it looks like to make a big promise, and then what it also looks like when God makes mind-blowing promises and then keeps them. Watch this.
But God did send to deliver her, or actually it was to deliver him, but... Hi friends, Bruxy here. When I was a kid, I saw the movie Frankenstein. And it made me think I would love to have the power of Dr. Frankenstein to create life, to make something alive. But I couldn't. That's impossible. We can't do that. But you know, as I grew up, I got married to Nina, and together we had baby Maya, cute as a button. And it dawned on me, we made life. Nina and I brought someone, a person, into existence. And that's how all of us got here. At first, it seemed impossible to me. But with God's help and in partnership with him and with someone I love, we made life. But first, the big idea. We can trust God even when things seem impossible. Let's dive into scripture. Last week we met Abram and Sarai in Genesis chapter 12. Today we're in Genesis chapter 15. God has been on a journey with Abram and Sarai, and now he stops them to say, Abram, I need to give you a bigger vision of how I'm going to use you in the future. In Genesis 15, the first thing God says to Abram is, Abram, do not be afraid. I am like a shield to you. I am your very great reward. I love that. Don't be scared. I'm your shield. I got your back. And I am your very great reward. What's my reward? Is it money? What's my prize? It's me, says God. I'm your reward because there's nothing better that we could ever have than a relationship with God. When God said this to Abram, he was still a little confused. He wasn't sure how God was going to bring about his promise. His response reads this way, Lord and King, what can you give me? I still don't have any children. Remember, God had promised to bless Abraham through his children and his children's 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 children and to bless the whole world through them. But Abram didn't have even one child, and he was already old. It seemed like God bringing this promise about was impossible. So God gave Abram more information. He said, Abram, a son will be born to you. And then he added these words, look up at the sky, count the stars if you can. And then he said to him, that is how many children you will have. God's promise to Abram was so mind-blowing, he knew Abram needed some reassurance. So back in those days, there was a way of saying, stamped it, no erases. Cross my heart and hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Weird stuff. It was weird then too. This is what they would do. They'd take an animal or a few animals and they'd chop them in half. Ew! Then they'd put the two halves apart from each other, and the people making the covenant or promise would walk between the animals. And that was their way of really making sure that the other person knew they meant what they said. It's called cutting a covenant, a way of promising to each other. So God got Abram to get a few different animals, and Abram knew what to do. He cut them, and before he walked through them, God himself put Abram to sleep and gave him a vision of God walking through them, through symbols, a torch and a fire pot, passing between the animals in this vision. It was God's way of saying to Abram, I'll bring about my own promise to you. I'm going to take care of everything. You can trust me. Abram trusted God, but God warned Abram and said, you know, it's not going to be easy for your kids. They're eventually going to become slaves in a country called Egypt, and they'll be there for 400 years, many generations of slaves. But don't worry, Abram, I'm going to send somebody called Moses who's going to deliver them out of Egypt and lead them into the promised land. God can partner with us to take what seems impossible and make it possible, just like he does with Abram and Sarai. Well, you know what? God did keep his promise. Of course he did. Abram and Sarai had a son Isaac, who had a son Jacob, who had many children, and they all became slaves in Egypt for a while, but then God did send a deliverer, and they all came to the land of Canaan and became the nation of Israel. God kept his promise, even though it seemed impossible, because we can trust God even when things seem impossible. Well, this has been fun. I'm Bruxy, signing off for this week. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Okay, turn to the person beside you.
And answer the following questions.
Question time. What seemed impossible for Abram in the God story? How would you feel if God told you to do something that seemed impossible? Game time! Candy Chaos. How many times can you say the key verse before things get messy? Say it with me. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you. I will put a curse on anyone who puts a curse on you. All nations on earth will be blessed because of you. Genesis 12, verses 2 to 3. Get ready. 3, 2, 1, go!
Corey, I'm so glad that nowadays we don't have to make an old covenant like Abram did back in that time. That would be horrible.
Yeah, that sounded pretty gruesome. The crazy thing is that if you broke that covenant, what happened to that animal could happen to you.
Yeah, that is pretty gruesome, but I think people would be more likely to keep their promises so that those horrible things wouldn't happen to them.
Yes, that's very true, and it's great to be reminded today that we can always trust God. God can do incredible things, even if people think it's impossible. So let's watch this video about Lisa and how her dreams came true.
As a kid, I started acrobatics. Acrobatics became my life. And then I fell ill. Over a very short period of time, I started developing these incredible back spasms, shoulders, neck, overwhelming fatigue, and just constant pain. Whether I was moving or not, I was in pain. The only relief that we found was I would get cortisone shots directly into the spasms, 10 to 14, lining my spine and my neck. And that in itself was painful, but as an 11-year-old kid, I was begging for these cortisone shots. I believed that God wouldn't give me this talent and then allow me to fall into this pit of nothingness. I believed that God would let me dance and do my acrobatics again. By the grace of God, I was able to do another provincials competition and I qualified for nationals. That's when the illness just hit really hard. Time started running out. I couldn't train. I was in so much pain, and time came to where it was the day before. I still wasn't able to train. I had that moment of doubt of, should I withdraw? With my parents, they said, no, we're going to pray. We're going to trust God. And the morning of the nationals, I woke up as subtle as can be. I was able to do the strength tricks, the contortionists. I was able to do the splits. I was able to do everything as if I wasn't sick. It took a bit of time, and even though doctors said there is no cure for this, God did heal me fully and completely. I was able to go back to high school, and suddenly I wanted to do everything. I discovered a world of sports, so I started playing cricket. And then I went on to field hockey as well, and I kept playing that, and we came to Canada, and I was on the Ontario team. I played goalie, and we got to play, and we became national champions for a few years running. I just grabbed life with both hands. I was able to reach my last goal of qualifying for the national championships, and for that, I can only thank God. And today, I have the privilege of looking back at the medals that I got provincially, nationally, for acrobatics, for field hockey, and I know that I don't have any bragging rights to this. It's purely the grace of God. So whenever life runs away with me, I can always look back at those medals and know that it's a reminder that I can trust God even when things seem absolutely impossible.
Whoa, did you see those moves that Liza could do? I can't believe she could roll up into a ball with her bum on her head like that. That in itself seemed impossible.
Yeah, that looked crazy. And to think that she could do that all after being sick. God completely answered her prayers.
I agree, and you know what stands out to me even more? The fact that she trusted God, even when she felt like time might be running out.
And we saw that with Abram, right? God made all of these promises to him that he thought was impossible. But it's so important that we don't give up and hold on to those promises until they happen. So let's go into our small groups now and see what that looks like for you guys.
In this week's lesson, we heard that God made a promise to Abram. He promised him that he would have a son, and God said to him, "Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. That is how many children you will have." Abram was going to be the father to many. After God made this promise, Abram cut a covenant, which is a really yucky way of sealing a promise. Something that I'm very glad that we don't have to do today. I don't think that I could cut an animal and walk through it to seal a promise that we'd have to make. I may not be able to make promises if that's what we had to do, but I'm thankful that we don't have to do that anymore. But Abraham was obedient, and he did partake in that cutting of the covenant with God. Abraham trusted God, but God warned him that it would not be easy for all of his descendants. They would become slaves in Egypt, but God promised to send someone to save his descendants and lead them into the land that God had promised, where they would become the nation of Israel. God can take what seems impossible and he can make it possible. Sarai and Abram did have a son in their old age, and eventually everything else that God promised or told Abram had also happened. we need to remember that we can trust God even when things seem impossible. So remember the next time that you are facing a situation that seems impossible, know that God can do anything and he will always be there to help us through whatever situations we face. Well, thanks for joining me this morning, guys. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving filled with family and lots of yummy food. Hopefully you all get to have some pumpkin pie. It's one of my favorites. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great weekend, guys.